Time of death, 2:37. Irina silently took off her blood-stained gloves and put them into the bin. Hot water flowed over her hands, but she felt neither heat nor cold. A 23-year-old boy had died on her operating table. She had done everything possible, even when there were almost no chances left, because his mother was crying just outside the operating room doors. Irina had realized long ago, as long as death brings pain, she remains a good surgeon. But that day, fate had prepared a blow for her that proved more terrible than any loss of a patient. In a few hours, she would be left without a husband, without a home, without a job, and she would be certain that her life had ended. Yet one accidental mistake by a young nurse would change her fate forever and give her a family she hadn't even dreamed of. The first call rang out just as she left the operating room. On the screen, the message glowed. "We need to have a serious talk." It was from her husband. Irina didn't yet know that these few words would turn her whole life upside down. Irina sat in the doctor's lounge, staring at one point. Behind the thin wall, the hospital lived its usual life. Phones were ringing, nurses were walking quickly, someone was laughing, someone was arguing, as if nothing had happened. But for her, the world had just stopped. She saw the young boy before her eyes again, the one who had been on the operating table a few minutes ago. 23 years old, too young to die. She had fought for him for almost 3 hours, stopping the bleeding, restarting the heart, begging colleagues not to give up. But sometimes, even the best surgeon is powerless. "Don't blame yourself," Nurse Svetlana said quietly, peeking into the office. Irina just nodded. She had long ago learned not to cry at work. However, every death left a small scar somewhere inside. And just then, her phone vibrated. On the screen was only one line. "We need to have a serious talk this evening." From Ilya. She smiled sadly. Seriously? As if there were anything left between them to save. For the last few months, they barely spoke. They lived in the same apartment, but were strangers. Once, everything had been different. They had met during a night shift. He was a young anesthesiologist with a light smile. She was a talented surgeon who lived for her profession. After shifts, they would sit for hours in a small cafe near the hospital, drinking cheap coffee and making plans. They bought an apartment together. They renovated it together. They dreamed of children together. Irina had given all her savings without hesitation. When they were filling out the documents, Ilya said, "Let's put the apartment in my name. It will be easier that way." She hadn't even thought about it, because she trusted. Love doesn't need checks. At least, that's what she thought. Then, a new head of the department appeared in the hospital. His daughter came with him. Beautiful, well-groomed, self-confident. She seemed to pass by Ilya's office every day by accident. She laughed too loudly at his jokes. She touched his hand too often. Irina saw it all. At first, she convinced herself it was just her imagination. Then she stopped lying to herself. And a few weeks later, she noticed another strange thing. The new boss started picking on her work specifically. He checked every report personally. He took every operation apart to the smallest detail. Any mistake became a reason for public criticism. Irina understood. It wasn't about professionalism. Someone just wanted to remove her from their path. And that evening, she finally found out how far things had gone. Returning home after her shift, she saw Ilya at the kitchen table. His coffee had long gone cold. He didn't even look up. "We need to get a divorce." Only 4 words, but they sounded as if someone had crossed out 10 years of her life with one motion. Irina silently placed her bag on the floor. She looked at her husband as if she were seeing him for the first time. Where had the person gone who once swore to love her for all his life? "Have you decided this a long time ago?" she asked calmly. Ilya finally raised his eyes. There was no shame or regret in them, only fatigue. "It will be better for everyone." For everyone. These words hurt more than the divorce itself. "And the apartment?" He answered almost immediately. "It is registered to me. You will have to move out." Irina felt everything inside her tighten. She was the one who had given all the money she had saved for years to this apartment. She had denied herself vacations, she had worked on holidays, she had taken extra shifts. But now, legally, she had nothing. Absolutely nothing. She could have argued, she could have screamed, she could have begged. But instead, she silently went to the bedroom. Within half an hour, her life fit into one suitcase. A few dresses, an old photo album, a book gifted by her grandmother, and her surgeon's diploma. Ilya didn't even come out to see her off. When the door closed, he just took a sip of coffee, as if nothing special had happened. She returned to the hospital with the suitcase. Colleagues looked at her in surprise, but no one asked questions. Everyone was busy with their own problems. The new head continued to fire people. Tension reigned in the corridors. Just then, a gurney rushed past her. A thin girl of about 12 was lying on it. Dirty hair, scratched hands, too pale a face. "What happened?" Irina asked automatically. "Found by the station. Severe exhaustion, pneumonia. We urgently need O-negative blood." Irina didn't even hesitate. "I have O-negative." The paramedic raised his head in surprise. "Are you sure?" "Start the registration." In the procedure room, there was an awkward silence. The young nurse asked her for her last name several times. The girl's hands were shaking. It was clear she had been working there for only a few days. "Are you nervous?" Irina smiled. The girl nodded guiltily. "I'm afraid to make a mistake." Everyone was a beginner once. The main thing is not to be afraid to learn. The nurse smiled gratefully and bent over the documents again. Irina didn't know that at this very second, the girl would make a mistake. A mistake that in 2 months would change the lives of several people at once. When the blood was transfused to the little patient, Irina went outside. The autumn wind felt especially cold. She looked back at the hospital building. 10 years of life. Thousands of people saved. Sleepless nights, victories, defeats, first love, and the biggest disappointment. Everything was left behind. Ahead was only her grandmother's old house in a distant village, and total uncertainty. Irina didn't yet suspect that a real family was waiting for her there, and the person who had kicked her out of the house today would soon lose everything he had tried so desperately to save. A week passed, then another. It was as if Irina was learning to live anew. Every morning she went out into the yard, inhaled the cool country air, and tried to convince herself that the worst was already behind her. She fixed the old fence, she weeded the garden, she washed the windows that hadn't been opened for many years. Physical labor helped. While her hands were working, her soul was silent. But at night, everything returned. She dreamed of the operating room, the young boy who couldn't be saved, Ilya, who had calmly asked her to take her things, and the thin girl from the hospital, looking at her with big, sad eyes. Why her? Irina didn't know, but that look gave her no peace. 2 months passed. The phone rang early in the morning. An unknown number. "Irina Sergeyevna?" "Yes?" "You are being contacted by the 7th City Hospital. You need to come and pick up your daughter." Irina didn't even understand what she heard at first. "Excuse me? Whose?" "Your daughter, Polina." There was a long silence. "I don't have any children." On the other end of the line, she heard the rustling of papers. The woman checked the documents once more and confidently replied, "In the database, you are listed as her mother." Irina felt a chill run down her spine. All the way to the city, she went through dozens of options. Could it be fraud? Could it be a cruel joke? A mistake? But the reality turned out to be even stranger. At the hospital, the administrator and the head nurse were already waiting for her. They looked so confused that Irina immediately realized something serious had happened. "We are very sorry." The administrator nervously clutched the papers. "The new nurse accidentally entered your data not into the donor log, but into the child's parent log." "What?" "It's a technical error. We will fix everything. But now a problem has arisen." "What?" "Polina is being discharged today. We couldn't find any relatives. If no one picks her up, the child will be transferred to an orphanage." Irina was silent. She had nothing to do with this girl. She could have just left, closed the door behind her, and never thought of her again. But suddenly, she asked quietly, "Can I see her?" Polina was sitting by the window. Her knees were pulled to her chest. Her hands were hugging her legs tightly, like a small hedgehog afraid of the whole world. When the door opened, she slowly raised her head. Their eyes met. Irina froze. These were the exact eyes she had seen in her dreams. Big, dark, filled with such pain that it made her heart ache. "Hello?" The girl didn't answer. She only nodded slightly. "I am Irina." "Polina." The voice was so quiet, as if she had long been used to no one listening to her. "Do you have a mom? A dad? Relatives?" Polina slowly shook her head. "I don't remember." Irina looked at her closely. Over years of work, she had learned to recognize pain. The girl was lying, not because she wanted to deceive, but because she was afraid. And then Irina said the words that changed both their fates. "I have an old house in the village. It's very big and very empty. If you want, you can live there with me until everything is cleared up." Polina slowly raised her head. For the first time in a long time, something like hope appeared in her eyes. "Really?" Irina smiled. "Really?" She didn't yet know that at that very moment, fate had given her not a temporary guest, but a daughter she would love with all her heart. A week later, the house had changed. Not on the outside. It changed on the inside. Where silence had recently reigned, now there was the quiet rustle of footsteps, the clatter of dishes, and a timid, "Can I help?" Polina seemed afraid to take up even an extra centimeter of space. After breakfast, she immediately washed her plate, and then she checked again to make sure she hadn't left a crumb somewhere. Irina watched her silently for a few days, and one evening, she couldn't take it anymore. "Polya?" The girl immediately tensed. "Yes." "You are not a guest." Polina raised her eyes in surprise. "You don't need to ask permission to drink tea every time. You don't need to apologize if you accidentally drop a spoon. And you don't need to thank me for every piece of bread. This is your home now." Polina didn't answer. She just lowered her head. But Irina noticed how a small palm wiped away a tear unnoticed. Days went by. Gradually, the girl began to smile. At first, very rarely. Then more often. Together, they baked an apple pie according to her grandmother's recipe. They went to the forest for berries. In the evenings, they watched old movies. Irina didn't notice herself starting to wait for these evenings. The house, which had recently seemed empty, had become alive again. One day, they were sitting in front of the TV. The news was on. Irina already wanted to change the channel, but Polina suddenly grabbed her hand sharply. Wait. A man in an expensive suit appeared on the screen. A tired face. The look of a person who had stopped sleeping a long time ago. The presenter was talking about a loud criminal case, about a big businessman, about a trial and multi-million-dollar fraud. But Polina didn't hear any of that. She was only looking at the man. Then he unexpectedly addressed the camera directly. "If my daughter is alive," his voice trembled. "Polya, if you see me, if you can hear me, I am looking for you every day. I have never stopped looking. Please, answer me." The next second, Polina jumped off the couch. "Dad." Her lips were trembling. "That's my dad." Irina froze. The girl pressed her palms to the screen as if she could touch the person on the other side. Tears flowed down her cheeks without stopping. "He is alive." She repeated this again and again. "He is alive." That evening, Polina told the whole truth for the first time. When she was 8, her mother died. Her father raised her alone. They were very happy. Together, they went to the theater, rode bicycles, learned to cook pancakes. And then a partner appeared in his business who wanted to take everything. Threats, forged documents, lawsuits. And one day, her father said, "Polya, we're going to play hide and seek." He wanted to save his daughter. But on the way, at a gas station, they were attacked. He only screamed one thing at me. Polina could no longer hold back her tears. "Run." And I ran. I ran as far as I could. Then I was afraid to return, afraid of the police, afraid of people. I thought my dad had died. A silence fell in the room. Irina silently approached the girl, hugged her. And for the first time, Polina didn't hold herself back. She cried for a long time. Children who have become adults too early cry like that. And it was then that Irina realized a strange thing. She could no longer imagine her life without this small, frightened girl. And ahead of them was a meeting that would change the destiny of all three forever. The next morning, they set off for the city. Polina was silent for most of the way. She held Irina's hand tightly, as if she were afraid that all this was just a dream, and she would wake up alone on a cold bench by the station again. "What if it's not him?" she whispered quietly. Irina looked at the girl. "Then we will get through that together, too." Polina nodded, but she didn't loosen her fingers. The meeting was scheduled at a law firm's office. Due to the high-profile case, the police insisted on such a place. A strange silence reigned in the spacious office. A tall man stood by the window. There was much more gray hair on his head than had been shown on TV. His shoulders were slumped. His face was exhausted from sleepless nights. But when the door opened, he froze. Polina did too. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other, as if they were afraid to believe it. Then the girl whispered quietly, "Dad." The man didn't even answer. He rushed to her, picked her up as if she were little again, pressed her tightly to himself. "Polenka, my daughter, forgive me, forgive me." He repeated it again and again, and Polina was crying and laughing at the same time. Irina went out into the corridor unnoticed. She looked out the large window and only now realized that she was crying too. not from pain, from relief. Almost 40 minutes passed before the door opened. The man approached her. His eyes were red, but life had returned to them. "Are you Irina?" "Yes." He extended his hand. "Dmitri Belov, I will be in your debt for the rest of my life." "No need." "There is." He spoke calmly, but very confidently. "You saved my daughter twice, first with your blood, then with your heart." They sat in a small conference room. Dmitri listened to her story attentively. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He only clenched his fists sometimes, when Irina told how her husband had left her without an apartment, how the new boss had forced her to quit, how she had fled to the village, having lost faith in people. Dmitri was silent for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. "Sergei, gather the team. Yes, right now. And find all the documents regarding Irina Sergeyevna's apartment." Something was answered on the other end. Dmitri hung up. "Why?" "Because justice should exist not only in books. I don't want to sue anyone. And this is no longer revenge. This is returning what belongs to you." From that day on, Dmitri began to visit the village often. At first, because of Polina. He brought her books, a new bicycle, a warm sweater. But he stayed longer and longer. He helped fix the roof, chopped wood. Together with Irina, he drank tea on an old wooden bench by the house. They barely spoke about love. Both knew that they understood the pain of loss too well, and that was why they weren't rushing. One evening, Polina watched them through the kitchen window for a long time. Then she smiled. "You know, Mom?" Irina looked around in surprise. Polina got scared immediately. "Sorry, I accidentally." A silence fell. Irina slowly approached the girl, sat down next to her, and hugged her tightly. "Never apologize for that again." Polina cried, and Dmitri turned away to the window silently, because there were tears in his eyes too. It was then that 3 people who had lost their most precious things had quietly become a real family, and none of them yet suspected that fate had prepared one last surprise, after which the past would finally be left behind. 6 months passed. During this time, Irina learned to wake up without pain. She no longer jumped at phone calls. She didn't wait for messages from Ilya. She didn't remember the apartment she had once considered her home. Her real home was here now. Grandmother's old house, the smell of apple pie, Polya's laughter, and Dmitri, who brought flowers every weekend. Although he said every time, "They're not for you, they're for the house. It needs a good mood too." Polina just smiled slyly. She had understood everything a long time ago. One day, the phone rang. Dmitri listened to the caller attentively and hung up. "What happened?" Irina asked. He smiled. "We won the court case." Irina froze. "How?" "The court recognized that you were the one who invested the money in the apartment. There are bank statements, witnesses, contracts." She couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, justice did exist after all. And that's not all. Dmitri put a folder on the table. "Your ex-husband has been fired." Irina looked up in surprise. "How?" "The former department head's daughter found someone else, and when the story about their affair became known, the hospital management decided to get rid of both of them at once." Irina was silent. She expected to feel joy, but she felt nothing. The past had ceased to have power over her. A few days later, Ilya himself came to the village. He stood by the gate for a long time, not daring to enter. He had aged. He had lost weight. His former confidence had vanished. When Irina went out into the yard, he lowered his eyes. "Hello? Hello." I wanted to talk. She waited calmly. I ruined everything. Yes. I was a fool. Maybe. Give me a chance. A long silence fell. Just at that moment, Polina ran out of the house. Dmitri followed her. In one hand, he held a cup of tea, and with the other, he was fixing the girl's hair. They were laughing. At home. For real. Ilya watched them silently. Finally, he understood that he hadn't lost a wife. He had lost a person who had loved him without any conditions. I'm late, he said quietly. Ilya nodded. Yes. Without anger, without resentment. She simply stated a fact. Ilya slowly walked to his car. She never saw him again. 6 more months passed. Polina was the first to notice the news. She looked at Irina attentively over breakfast. Mom? Irina smiled. She was already used to this word. What is it? You've been feeling nauseous lately. Dmitri looked up. Irina laughed. It seems we are having a child. For a few seconds, silence fell in the house. And then Dmitri hugged her so tightly that she almost spilled her tea. Polina jumped for joy. I'm gonna have a little brother or sister. They got married in the spring. Without luxury, without hundreds of guests, only the closest people. Polina walked around in a white dress all day and repeated to everyone, "This is the best day of my life." A few months later, a son was born. Healthy, loud, and very much like Dmitri. Polina sat by the cradle for hours, read him fairy tales and sang lullabies. And one evening, Irina stood by the window and watched the snow falling slowly behind the yard. She remembered the day she left the apartment with only one suitcase. At that time, it seemed to her that life had ended. And now, children's laughter rang out behind her back. In the kitchen, Dmitri was making tea. Polina was arguing about which fairy tale to read to the baby. Irina smiled, and for the first time in many years, she thought, sometimes fate takes everything away just to clear space for true happiness. If she hadn't lost her husband, hadn't gone to the village, hadn't agreed to donate blood, and hadn't met the frightened girl with huge eyes, she would never have found the family she hadn't even dared to dream of. And perhaps such coincidences are what we call a miracle. If this story touched your heart, please support it with a like. And write in the comments, do you believe that after the darkest streak in life, a bright one always comes? Perhaps your answer will give someone hope.